All right. And we are officially live. Hey, what's up, everyone? Abel Perez here. Jose Rodriguez.
Rohi Zacharias.
And this is the weekly jargon, fellas. Welcome back. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And all of the good stuff that comes with it. 2025 is amongst us. And while we all have goals, ambitions, and excitement towards things, and California was hit hard, especially Southern California, well, specifically in Southern California, with these wildfires. A lot of lost homes, a lot of displaced families. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's get down to the conspiracy.
Are you painting your roof blue? Let me
Yeah,
ask
that's
you
right. No, it's crazy that this event happened. It's unfortunate for a lot of those families. Obviously, it just didn't affect only the Palisades, but the surrounding communities. Pasadena.
It's like 5 fires, right?
These Santa Ana winds
Palisades.
are the real deal, and I think the conditions were the perfect conditions for something like this. I think when you hear these wildfires that spread out in those areas, there's always the potential of those Santa Ana winds catching something, and you hear it all the time. It's not the first time, but this is the first time that you hear of this huge, devastating loss for a lot of those families.
Yeah, I mean, when you get a lot of these, you find out the differences between federal land management and state land management. And their differences is federal takes the approach of controlled burns. If you ever go to Yosemite, you'll see them where they'll be chopping down dead trees, they'll be burning the stuff out because you kind of have to have that natural cleansing. People forget that wildfires are a natural occurrence. I mean, you have to have that to clear out the dead. It's what brings in the new. But again, state fire says, smoke is bad and pollution kills everyone. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to disturb nature. And then you get the perfect conditions where now you have lots of dead brush, lots of dying or dead trees, and you get that spark, and that's it. It's over. So nature's going to do what nature's going to do, which is it needed a cleansing, and it's cleansing itself. So.
Yeah. The media does a great job. I mean, and this is in all outlets, whether it's social media and just your general media outlets regarding fires and who started these fires, right? I mean, there's always something they want to blame or someone, right? So you'll see these clips of someone saying, put that down. There's a man with a torch.
Yeah.
Now there's a laser, something like that. Someone puts up, it's hard not to, go down that rabbit hole and think that, hey, could this potentially have been an arson out there, just knowing that these are the perfect conditions for a massive fire this size.
Yeah.
And it kind of wiped out the whole area there and surrounding communities. But, what are your thoughts on that when you see clips like that? I'm not sure if you guys have been exposed to that, but
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that, I think we got to understand, kind of to Rohi's point, right? We far too often we allow, kind of like the Peter to Rob Paul sort of thing, where, we take away from one initiative because we're concerned about another, and so that preventative maintenance goes out the door because of some wildlife, preserving, ideology that we have in place. And we experienced that here at home in Madera just a couple years ago. And I have, a good friend of mine who lost his home because we were not cleaning out the riverbank and it caught on fire. It was windy and that thing fueled and it reached and burned down 2 homes, right? And then after we're scratching our head thinking, oh, that was bad. Oh, we should. And within 2 weeks, that riverbed was clean, and it's been maintained since. And the consensus, and maybe Jose can give me a little bit more insight. But what I had heard was there was some species, some wildlife species that we were trying to preserve because that was their natural habitat, and we didn't want to disrupt that. And so there were, there was equipment that had been purchased, and people that were in place to have that preventative maintenance, but they were all at a standstill because of the inability to work in that area because of this preserving of this wildlife species. And but following that, a quick, forms of communication when you're showing, hey, this family's now displaced, or these two families are now displaced because of this wildfire occurrence that happened. Things happened pretty quickly, and again, within a couple weeks, that thing was cleared out. So it's nothing. This is nothing. That Madera incident was nothing at the magnitude of what we're seeing in LA, but it's like the stepping stones to what could happen. So this podcast, obviously, we're ranked top 3 in the world, and Joe Rogan just a couple steps behind us, and he hopes to get to our level one day, right? But in 2024, in the summer of 2024, he on his podcast was saying, hey, I talked to an ex-fire chief, and they've told me that Los Angeles is a windstorm away from being lit on fire, and said that, and the communication was, we get lucky. The fire department gets lucky when there's fires in Los Angeles. The wind goes away, or it'll start raining. We have, Mother Nature will help us out. But without that help, we don't have the capacity to extinguish these fires if that wind was to continue. So in perfect conditions, this thing could all light up and go up in flames. Yeah. Boom, here we are. It happened, right? So that's my 2 cents.
But I think for most people, it's not that it could happen. It's the fact that you had 2 major occurrences with Malibu and now LA in such close proximity. It'd be one thing if we were talking about Malibu was 15 years ago, and it's like it just happened. Right. Same exact thing. Same. The same, everything is burnt to the ground. Prime real estate, beachfront real estate burned to the ground, and that's where it gets hard to say, really. Is that too coincidental?
Lahaina and Maui.
Well, hey, who's going to buy it up? The insurance companies dumped everybody just conveniently around the corner. Obviously now they're backpedaling, but and like you're saying, with our riverbed and the protection. One of the things that why was there dry brush? Because we stopped giving water to that riverbed. Why? Because we're saving some smelt that doesn't exist, downstream. When reality is we're giving the water to LA because they're paying more for it. So there's definitely solutions to a lot of the problems. They just don't want to be taken, and we're not. It's out of our control.
Yeah.
But you talk about especially our riverbed and the homelessness. A lot of those fires are not lasers, or not spawned. It's because of the homeless that are getting in there. They're digging in, making their home in the brush because they want to hide, and they start their fires because it's cold.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and you're starting to see more and more, come out budget cuts that are starting to be scrutinized. The application of funds, the warning signs, or the flags that were being waved for help. Right. Yeah. I think there was a letter from the fire chief down there that was stamped that it was received December of 2024, and it said, hey, these budget cuts that we're experiencing are preventing us from, between the budget cuts, I think it was $7 million of actual revenues, and then a handful of overtime, right, that was being eliminated from their budget, and now you're having to operate with those things. And they're saying, hey, we can't have our fire, prevention programs anymore because of these cuts. We can't bring, public awareness, and we're not able to do things because of these cuts. And then I saw this morning, on some news outlet that, it's confirmed, Los Angeles County is one of the most understaffed fire departments relative to other major cities in the United States, and so there is a problem there, right? And it's never a problem until it's a problem. Yeah. And then you sit back, and it's easy, I guess, for us to kind of sit back and scrutinize it and say, man, why didn't we do this? Well, sometimes we put people in position, and we assume that they are taking these things into consideration, right? And but sometimes we lose focus, and there might be a political steering that oftentimes occurs, and we're told to pay attention to something else versus the most basic things, right? Like public safety and water and just essential resources. So,
well, here's a question. Because you see this all the time, and when it hits when the shit hits the fan, then this is when we start assessing or analyzing like who is at fault, right? But the question is, why would people want to live in these canyons where they're very prone to these particular fires?
Yeah.
It's no different. What does Mother Nature do when homes are not there?
Yeah.
Fires still start, right? Lightning hits, fires start. We see it up in the foothills quite often. But yet, people still want to move near these fires, these high-risk fires.
Yeah.
Hence why you have like these California FAIR plans that are super expensive. You know, lately, as of late, you've seen with insurance companies how, you know, their premiums have gone up, but that's no different with the California FAIR plan. I just talked to a friend up there that lives not too far away from the foothills, but their insurance policy, California FAIR plan, is closer to the $10,000. On top of that, he's got to have these supplemental insurances, $2,000 a year. That's $12,000 a year in insurance. Again, for the risk of being close to the Mother Nature of what can take place. These particular areas are not immune to these particular winds. And like you said, maybe they've been lucky.
Yeah.
It just takes the perfect storm, or in this case, these winds with the small fire, and you saw the embers just really working their way through these homes. People that were spraying water on their roofs, I think some of them were able to get lucky enough so that their homes did not start on fire. But for the most part, I mean, I ask myself the question is, I mean, you have to expect Mother Nature to take its course at some point. It's no different than those people that live next to these choppy waves down the coast where they build their homes right there where the water's at, but yet, you know, maybe a small tsunami or some type of wave comes in there, racks it up, and guess what? You'll have to rebuild it.
Yeah.
They pay for that. They have the money to do that. Here's the issue that I have is because of people that choose to live in these areas, and this is nothing against the people. I'm talking about people that continuously put themselves at risk over and over and over. They'll find someone to blame. Well, should it be PG&E? Should it be forest management? Well, shit. I mean, if you're saying that they're underfunded, I mean, come on. Who's really paying for that? I mean, to keep the luxury of living in these areas that are very high risk, right? So we don't really experience a lot of fires. What we do experience is flooding occasionally. And we've seen that in the last couple of years when we had these wet years. But, I mean, to continuously put yourself in these high-risk arenas, somebody has to pay for that. And these fires will not go, you know, without somebody forking the bill. And typically, you spread that amongst all your ratepayers.
Yeah.
And that comes back to you, and to myself, right? It isn't like you're regionally rated for risk. You're rated overall. So if someone out in the east has these tornadoes, hurricanes that come every single year, and then you hear the devastating issues that take place. I mean, it's not that I'm not being sensitive. It's just, it happens every year. It's a cycle. And then all of a sudden, tornado, you name it, right? Joan, Karina, Katrina, whatever the case may be, it comes and it's devastating. Yeah. And you see the outcome of it. It's not easy.
Yep.
People lose homes, and then you have to rebuild, and it happens all over again.
But in this case, it's almost like you have to take the approach of healthcare. You know, California is pushed to have the healthcare from the government because people are getting canceled. They're not covered. It's almost like you think that's going to be around the corner to say, okay, you're paying this $12,000, but then they can cancel you. They're not going to cover you. Where you're really asking for, we need a program that can't cancel me, that maybe part of that money goes to that fire funding, you know, because it's a government program. It's not something everybody wants to have. Like, I don't want government programs, but if it means they can't cancel me, or that it's covered, or that, like you say, me as the ratepayer that's over here in Madera that doesn't have tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes or forest fires, why am I paying for them? Well, that's just part of the program. Because I was thinking when you said like the Tornado Alley and these guys that keep rebuilding, I mean, yeah, to some degree you got to say they chose that path, and if they choose to rebuild, they're choosing that path again. But, you know, if an insurance company should still cover them, if if it's $10,000, $12,000, well, they've done the assessment. They know you're likely in the next 5 to 10 years your house is going to burn down, and it's basic math. They got to cover that $500,000 home. Well, it's not magic. They got to get the money from somewhere. But But to say like, where does it go and how do people move forward? Well, that's where you kind of run into this problem. And they're not going to be able to move forward. Is that part of the plan? I don't know. You know,
and then
but what's the solution?
Yeah,
Because it's going to come again. I mean, like if they rebuilt today and 10 years from now, the same conditions exist, it's going to burn down again. You know?
I don't disagree, and here's where, I mean, you know, it gets political because, you know, a lot of folks were saying, well, could LA County really contain that fire? Could you have enough staff to be able to have prevented that?
Yeah. No.
I mean, you know, I think they've
But it's not
said
preventative, but it's just knowing that as a state now. I mean, there's definitely going to be some enormous growth because here goes your construction industry. Here goes all these industries that are going to kick in for the rebuilding of it, right? But you have a loss of income now because again, I have no home, so I'm not paying my property tax. I would assume goes to zero because I'm getting assessed on my home value. Right, so you're going to have all of these losses. People are leaving, so there goes. I mean, here comes your crumbling of your whole economic, you know, system there. How are you going to kick in? And that's what I'm saying. Like these programs would kind of assist in that, but you can't rely on insurance companies that at the whim can say we don't cover you, or that wasn't the perfect condition, and because it happened because of an arson, now no, we're not going to cover you. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to those areas, there is some forest management, but it isn't all on the LA fire department.
No.
CAL FIRE is also part of
I mean,
that.
what
And
if it was
there's
caused
other
by an earthquake?
U.S.
And
Forest
then what? You were going to
Services.
say we didn't
Yeah.
have enough preventative digging in the ground to prevent. No,
See,
it's
but
gonna
it gets politicized, you know, and I
know.
think you've seen that going back and forth. They want resignation on both ends for the mayor of LA, right? And then they want the, I think, resignation of your governor out there, right? I mean, and I can see that. I mean, because right now, I think the environment that we're in, it's heavily politicized. You know, right now it's getting crazy. And, you know, where do you stand, right? Are you influenced enough to say, yes, that is your fault? You're not doing enough. You don't have enough money. You have these cuts. You're not bringing in water from the Delta that needs to be out there. Because some of these hydrants, I mean, according to their reports, were gone within first couple of hours. There wasn't enough water.
Yeah.
Right. And whose fault is that? Who should be responsible for?
Yeah, I want to divert the. I want to
Divert the
I
water?
want to pinpoint the taxes, right, or the cost. And you talked a little bit about like, well, these people are choosing to live there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not free housing that they're choosing to live in. They're paying a premium, an extreme premium for these homes, right? In many of these hills areas, I would challenge that the average house cost there is about $2 million for these neighborhoods, right? And if you're looking at a 1.25% tax rate on there, that's about $25,000 of property taxes on an annual basis. Multiply it by all those homes out there, and so if you're that community paying $25,000 of property taxes, you're wondering, hey, what does that get me, right? Now, if the decision makers or policy makers within that region are saying, well, it's going to get you the basic essentials, but we really can't, I forget what it's called. We can't really, sweep through and clean out brush and make fire lines because we can't touch these hills because they're preserved and they're precious and, and so we can't use the money there. It's just not, we don't have the availability to do that. Is that the case? I don't know. I'm just giving an example. But when you hear things like, hey, the fire department showed up to that neighborhood and they were ready to fight that fire and draw a line, and there's no water in the hydrants, right? Where's the water, right? We're ass out of luck, right? And that's where we say the infrastructure had issues, right? Why wasn't that being tested? How frequently was it being tested? Those are measures in place that our electeds within that region are responsible for ensuring get done, right? And I think that's why you're seeing the push for, hey, our mayor not putting enough emphasis on, our response to natural disasters, because preventing natural disasters from happening, it's pretty impossible, right? But just like we assess any disaster or any crisis, we say, okay, what happens when this starts, right? What's our process when this starts? And it just doesn't seem like we had we had enough of that. And then, with the mayor resignation, I've heard that the push, or I've seen some celebrities on their Twitter or X and their Instagrams, they say, hey, you know what? While people were, evacuating, fleeing, trying to figure out what to do, our mayor was pretending she was a Secretary of State and she was in Africa at some inauguration or something, right? And it took her time to get back before, and be with the people and give leadership and direction. And those are the type of things that get you in trouble, right? You're out there in another country celebrating, and and meanwhile you got your town's literally on fire.
Yeah.
So it's those type of leadership decisions that people need to be conscious of, and you can put yourself under a lot of scrutiny, right? So I think there's just a lot that goes into that, man, and it's just unfortunate. It is hard. You can attest to it. It's hard to try to run a city and make everybody happy, right? But at the forefront of what the people need, it's always going to be safety, right? And I always bring things back to Madera because we're in beautiful Madera, California, where property is far cheaper. So bring your businesses and your tax dollars over here and start spending them. But we saw that when the hospital went away, right? We saw wow, that we don't have a hospital. That's scary. And what happened, and fingers were being pointed, and people, why is Councilman Jose Rodriguez not fighting for us, right? Well, we have to remind people, well, it's a private, it's a private practice, it's a private, facility. It's not ran by the city, it's not ran by the county. But I think the consensus in those moments is we do want our elected officials to have relationships with these private providers and ensure that we're keeping them happy, we're keeping them afloat, and in order to be able to serve the public in a time of need, right?
And during that time, remind folks that COVID, right? COVID was the disaster at the time, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there was overspending that wasn't normal. But again, we were not kept apprised of the accounting or the budgeting and what have you, right? We didn't know if they were already dipping into the red prior to COVID. But we certainly know that during this disaster, or natural disaster, or the pandemic, it affected the way the hospital runs its budget, because they had to overruns, right? They had to pay a lot more for these traveling nurses, because at that time, not a lot of people were available to be able to provide these services. So overtime was huge, right? And then after the aftermath, well, then here's what's left. And guess what? We have to close our doors. Well, to some extent, as elected officials, I think, having our noses in their private organization certainly affects us with our community, but we're not part of that decision making. These were local electeds within that board, or local appointed electeds within that board, that are making the decisions for that hospital. And at that moment, natural disaster, you have to take action on what you think is the best course of action to be able to help the community, right? You hear the stories of lines of people, and people are dying, and we're out of respirators, we're out of this, we need the ICU beds and what have you. And shortly after, you saw the aftermath. They really couldn't keep afloat, but there was a big conversation around what happened. Who should we blame? Obviously, you had the heat came a lot on the county. A lot of people divert that to the city, but quite frankly, like you said, Abel, that's not really our jurisdiction. Yeah. It is its own district, it's or its own organization, private organization. But we're starting to see that it's coming back up. Luckily, the state was able to help. We have an operator there that's looking to start this hospital, and hopefully we'll get it back up and running, and not see it in the red in the future, but rather provide the services that this community needs.
Before Rohi, you respond to that, I know you were getting ready. I just wanted to acknowledge that Trash Can Kicker on YouTube gave you a shout out. He says, "Rohi, I'm your biggest fan."
There you go.
Double exclamation mark. So shout out to Trash Can Kicker. Is that you? Is that your little burner account? You're giving yourself a shout out?
Anyway. In response to, like you're saying with the hospital, the hospital itself we don't have control, but the secondary services that the state does have, which is like Camarena Center, and when you say, like when those first discussions came about and said, how do we supplement a lot of these services, I mean, obviously, they stepped up and they started offering these services, but it's like they still could have gone further. You know what I mean? That they should have been taking on a lot more of what I would say is some of the load the hospital was getting, which was people who didn't need emergency care. They needed, fever, headache. They had, COVID symptoms, but not quite to the severity of an ICU or respirator. That was what was necessary. And you could, because that's a state-owned or state-funded entity, you could have easily said, hey, expand your doors, expand your times, because they're not 24 hours. They're very limited on when they're open and closed. And I think if you would have pushed that earlier on, there wouldn't have been these overrun beds, and there wouldn't have been all this demand on the hospital where, again, the majority of these people that are coming in because of where we are, they're not insured. They don't have the money for it. So, I think they said at that time, if you walked in as a patient, for one, they can't turn you down. And just for you to walk in and get a thing of Tylenol, it cost the state $3,000. So you can imagine how much of this was going on, and again, they don't recoup that money. So that's where when you say the state funded or these state entities, they could have taken a lot burden on way sooner. But guess what? The state has very strict policies that says if you come in as a patient and you got a fever, but you're at the ER cannot say, hey, if you go around the corner to our clinic or Camarena, you can get seen for free. You can't do that. If they're in the ER, that's it. You have to stick them in the ER. So there are crazy policies in place that you go like, that doesn't make any sense. So somebody comes in and they have like a minor cut, or they're just not feeling good, they're throwing up. Oh, emergency care, $3,000. Just to look at them and go like, yeah, here's a Band-Aid and go home.
Yeah.
That's part of your problem.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone anticipated the pandemic to the extent that we had, right? I mean,
Sure.
It happened pretty quickly. Certain states reacted a lot quicker. I know California was one of those states that initially took some action in trying to combat this by closing down certain things,
Yeah.
right? And they were, very, you kept people updated on what's taking place. But again, it took us by surprise. You look at this is government policy, but you look at the private industry, for example, people rushing to stores to try to get supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Doomsday is around the corner, whether it be toilet paper or other supplies,
Mm-hmm.
and you had supply chain issues, right? I mean, that affected us. It affected us somehow mentally. We thought we got traumatized in some pandemic deal. Well, now we have to have masks. Now you can't operate. There are a lot of things going on at the time, and it's easier for us to assess after the fact that we could have done all these things. But at that moment, I think they were doing everything that that at the moment that you could do. Now, could they have done more? Yeah. I mean, looking backwards now, I can say, well, shit, we could have done a lot better. Mm-hmm. These are costly lessons that we learn in moving forward and saying, how do we combat or manage a crisis of this magnitude,
Yeah.
so that we don't run into these issues, right? Same thing happened with these forest fires up there. How do you manage people to get out and evacuate, right? Do we have the sufficient infrastructure to get people out of the hills up there whenever the mountains are on fire, right? And you'll never be able to get to every single issue that arises with that, right? Because, I didn't have that road open to me. Well, it wasn't open to these people. I don't know that we have enough, and people may argue, well, if you did something differently, well, maybe we need to have a Doge for the for our county,
Yeah.
right? A Department of what is it? Government energy
efficiencies.
Efficiency, yeah. But I mean, frankly, I don't know that we ever will. There'll always be something that was left out. But there'll always be someone to blame.
But that's where as Madera it gets difficult, because again, it's a selling point for real estate is to say we don't have earthquakes, we don't have tornadoes, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have anything. So when you say like what's going to be Madera's LA situation, you know what I've heard? When we get snow. And you go like, what? That's going to yeah, because we don't have snow machines, we don't have snow plows, we don't have snow equipment, and because why would we? We don't get snow,
Right.
But we have gotten snow, So you get to some of these points where you say, how do we plan for snow? Are you going to go put $1 million in reserve and have a snow plow for the next 20 years, waiting for the once in a 100-year snowstorm that comes in that puts just enough to shut us down? No. But what's going to happen is when it happens, we're just going to say, well, Jose, they told you that snow was going to shut us down. You didn't buy a snow machine, So that's where it kind of gets difficult with us. Is LA, they don't always have these fires. So they're probably thinking more. They probably have a very good earthquake preparedness plan, right? You go probably look at their earthquake plan, and they've got it down. They're doing their drills. Their engineering is top notch for that. Or maybe it's the tsunamis because they know waves and they're on the beach, right? But when you talk about a city plan, it's like, what do we plan for? We don't get anything. Rain? I mean, like flooding? Like, we've had flooding, really drastic flooding in the city, but how are you addressing those issues?
Yeah, we do have an emergency plans that we coordinate not only with your police, your sheriff's department, county, and state. We do have certain action management plans that we have, and those have to be updated every so often. Again, and these are for crisis, but like you said, snow. I mean, I would not advise for us to buy millions and millions of dollars of equipment for snow, knowing that we haven't reached to that point, or we haven't received that type of snow here.
Global warming, thankfully, not global cooling.
But I mean, we're in the valley, right? And we know that snow. I mean, using science, you typically get that at higher altitudes, right?
And I want to say something, Jose, because in the last couple ways that you've answered, you don't have to come to defense of like your actions as a councilman for the city.
Sure.
Okay. We're not saying, Jose, why didn't you do this? We're just speaking in general. Like, this is more of like, hey, should we be thinking about this? And how do you implement this type of thought or that type of foresight in order to get there? So I just don't want you to feel like we're trying to like.
But no, I don't think it's poor planning on the city. Like if it snows tomorrow and we get a foot of snow, I'm not going to say, Jose, we just talked about it yesterday.
But being part of the city, you can't help but say, well, wait a minute. I mean, let's look at it this way also, right? Because I am a city council member. I do look after some of that budget. And whenever people ask about the response action or response team, did you take well, yeah, here's why. But it's important to let people know how we manage and how we budget and for what. What are the important priorities that we have, when it comes to a certain thing. So it's not that it's a natural thing for me.
I guess the approach was to say, let's look at what insurance really is. It's a gamble on what may happen.
Probability.
Okay, it's exactly. It's just we think this place is going to burn down. It costs $1 million to repair it. We think it's going to happen in this amount, and you're paying for it over time. Basically, that's all you're doing. And if you don't ever burn down, then the insurance company wins. And if it burns down in 2 years, now they got to figure out how to get the money from somebody, right? So that's where when you look at the city and you say, like, let's think of, like I said, a snow problem. The scientists come out, they say statistically it happens once every 100 years. This is what it's going to cost Madera if it happened today, $1 million. So you budget and you say, okay, for the next, 100 years, we're gonna set $10,000 aside in an interest-bearing account because we got inflation, and then if it happens, there's the money. It's already there. But I feel like what happens is we say, like you said, we'll budget, we'll buy the machines, we never use them, so we sell it off to somebody else later on down the road, and then it happens, and you go, well, we didn't really budget for it. We spent it elsewhere because we needed the money, but. I don't know. I've always liked the interest bearing. It just seems like if you have the money, you set it aside, which, in politics, you guys say the city sets this money aside, but then it doesn't get used and it gets reabsorbed back into the budget and spent on something else instead of saying, well, put it in this pot, let it earn its interest, it's there, it's in case we need it, but it's needed only for that need.
And I mean, if you look at all the natural hazards that we have, and you'll do this in real estate, you'll see everything that's out there, right? You'll check boxes of what we have. Here in our community or our region, you're not going to see heavy fires. You're not going to see heavy earthquakes. You're not going to see a lot of snow disasters. Yeah, we're prone to flooding, but that's why the insurance already has a premium or a supplement on that. They'll tell you based on the area that you're in if you're in a flood zone. And with it, you have to pay the premium based on that probability of a flood. This happened. Nobody had seen a flood in the area that we've experienced, especially in Planada. I mean, this was an area that nobody ever thought, but it is in a flood zone. I mean, it's already, people know about it. Well, let me take that back. It's on the map.
Yeah.
People may have not thought that it was going to happen,
Yeah.
but it happened.
But FEMA has it listed as a flood
It has it listed as a flood zone,
Yeah.
correct. And areas in Madera are listed at flood zone. But to your point is that if that was the case, and I think we would have to allocate money for a lot of these other disasters that are high, very low probability, right? What about a major earthquake? Should we be prepared for that? What is their response, action for that? So I think you're right in that maybe we should. I mean, 100 years from now, maybe by that time we have millions of dollars generated for that one snow day that we need to plow out snow or get some chains here. I mean, I'm not gonna try to put my response out there to be
Sure.
attacked on it, but I strongly doubt that will happen here. That you're gonna
You're not Nostradamus
going to,
either.
yeah.
Well, my buddy, he travels. He's an engineer for a manufacturing company, and he's traveling all over the country, and he goes back down to Georgia. They have a plant in Athens, Georgia, and he was just there last week, and he sends us pictures. He goes, the whole town is shut down. He goes, everybody's freaking out. He goes, and they got like 6 inches of snow. And he goes, imagine Fresno getting this snow. It never snows here, So when you said that, it's kind of funny because there are towns that it does create chaos. It does create panic, because what do we do? How do we function? How do we get to work? And all of those things. But yeah, obviously, very very rare occurrences there. So.
And the Central Valley would be. It wouldn't be just a Madera deal. This would be a whole Central Valley where the response would be more of a state, counties, and local people trying to make things, again, these response actions that we have to take into account because that's how the management works. These crisis management plans work.
Well, that's why when you get into the argument of shared payment, like why are we paying for LA's fires? Well, because they're going to pay for us when we get that snowstorm. It's no different than insurance. I don't get sick or go to the hospital, but I'm paying for the other person that goes every week, and that's just how it works. So you can't really you can't be micro scale and say, well, Madera has no problems. We've never had a problem. We're not budgeting anything. You get to kind of say, well,
but the number you mentioned something that earlier regarding the LA did not have these in history. Santa Ana winds are there every year or every other year. That's bound to happen because these winds dry out certain brush, and it exposes. It puts it at risk to be able to lit on. Just if you light it on fire, that thing's gonna create these huge fires.
Yeah.
But they happen so often that you can already account for that probability. You can say, well, Madera to have a fire of that magnitude, very little, maybe 10%. But that arena, maybe 70 to 80%. So if you know that, you know what you're going into, right? And the same thing happens to these beach properties that are like right next to these huge waves. It happens almost every other year. These hurricanes come in, but again, we go up there, we build them again, and somebody has to pay for that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, Rohi, is that if you look at that, I'm not saying you shouldn't choose where to live. I'm just saying, know that when you're living there, it's hard for you to say, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is on social media, I've seen, and I haven't really seen it like take off like wildfire, no pun intended, but I have seen the attempt to try to scrutinize the wealthy in Los Angeles for purchasing private entities to come and spray their houses with fire retardant or fight the fires that are leading towards their neighborhood. I've seen where it's, they should be ashamed of themselves. The rich can't just get what they want. And it's like, wait a minute. If I have the means and I choose to spend my money the way I spend it, and I call a company in Nevada or Oregon and say, hey, you have a couple planes that dump fire retardant, I'll pay you $2 million. Come spray my neighborhood. Me and my 5 neighbors on this hillside, we're going to put in on it. Come spray it for the next 3 days. Why is that a problem? But as society, again, we sometimes we fall into that trap of being like the victims all the time, right? Who's helping us? Why can't you help? Well, those are the basic resources. These are the basic, these are the basic things that we can do at this time, and that's it. But if these individuals who are choosing to use their own assets to bring in other resources, well then that's what they chose to do,
Yeah.
right? But it's also an example of there are resources out there or companies out there that do this, right? And so should we have kind of an emergency contact list with government rates, right? To say, hey, when the state goes into a state of emergency, right? Technically, you're not supposed to raise gas prices, hotel prices, rental car prices. You can't start price gouging, victims of a state of emergency, right? Well, in a state of emergency, do government entities start having, relationships with these private companies saying, hey, in a state of emergency, if available, right? Obviously, we don't want to interrupt your business, but if available, you are to perform these services at this negotiated rate, right? And it's at a haircut. And the understanding is, hey, shoot, if it's under a state of emergency, it's because people are harmed, So servicing that is for the greater good of people. I have the resources. Okay, I'm being called on by my country to to help, right? Yeah. And I mean that's kind of like that Good Samaritan. We will call it the Good Samaritan rule, right? Businesses, you have a Good Samaritan rule. This is what you're required to do because it's out there.
But I mean, that goes back to feeling like that's a FEMA, that there's already enough Homeland Security. There's all these agencies that like it shouldn't be California or individuals requesting it. It should have been day one. We see it's getting out of control. FEMA kicks in. They already have everything, whether it be government or whether going through, like I said, Nevada, Arizona. There should have been a lot of that instead of saying, hey, I'm Mel Gibson and I got $2 million, come spray my neighborhood. It should have been like, no, they were already called.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Do we? Is that a response? Is that an opportunity? Right? Is Madera, the city of Madera? Do we work with Oakhurst and Bass Lake and those departments who we know have the snowplowers? We know they're used to it. Maybe not at the capacity that we are here, right? And then maybe we start being savvy, like, hey, what would it take to keep 2 extra ones on hand, right? Could you use them? Could you be more efficient? We'll lease them back to you to, cover the cost of those. But those are the type of things that I think, as electeds and local leaders, that's how you leverage relationships with local businesses. It's not always, hey, the government's going to front all this money for it, because let's face it, Jose will tell you, we still want sidewalks on every street. We still want green space in neighborhoods. Jose, why this? Why that? Right? He hears it left and right. And so, we don't have enough money to do it all, but we can start leveraging our relationships with the businesses that we're approving at the Planning Commission with Roki to, call Madera County home, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Okay.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that kind of wraps up in a nutshell what we've been missing out in the last 3 weeks or more, right?
Well, we had Christmas, New Year's, and unfortunately I was eating a lot of tamales the whole time, and I was in a coma, couldn't leave my house.
Well, it's good to be back. We hope to see you guys again next week. Continue to share, subscribe, and as I told you last time, we reached our 100th follower. I think we're probably above that, but we'd like to share more and more content. And again, going back to the what was the name of the person?
Trash can kicker.
Trash can kicker.
Oh yeah, trash can kicker. In fact, he actually followed up and said, "Can you please extend this by 20 more minutes? I'm loving it." That was about 22 minutes ago, so we gave you an extra 2 minutes. Trash can
There you
kicker.
go. So there, you got a big fan, and if there's
Great.
any other fans like that, please comment. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about. But appreciate you following us and continue to share.
Yeah, and Rohi did say that if you get a tattoo of his name anywhere on your body, he's willing to pay for it. So, yeah, and he says we need 10 hours of this. So, Trash Can Kicker, we appreciate you. Tell your friends, your family, and don't forget to print out that T-shirt and advertise for us as you go on your day-to-day lives.
There you go.
Cool. Well, thank you. This is Weekly Jargon. Like, share, subscribe. Tell all your friends, your family that we're talking some mad jargon on this show. And